Today, I am honored to welcome an author whose storytelling resonates across audiences of all ages. With seven young adult novels, six picture books, and numerous accolades to his name, including the Newbery Medal for Last Stop on Market Street, he's a master at weaving tales that connect deeply with readers. From his debut novel, Ball Don't Lie, became a feature film, to the beloved Mexican WhiteBoy, which highlights identity and belonging. His works often reflect the power of representation and the complexities of growing up. Let's dive into the mind of an author who continues to inspire and challenge us with his words, Matt de la Peña.
Thank you for having me.
You've written across multiple genres from young adult novels to picture books. Can you share what inspired you to become an author and how your journey has evolved over the years?
Yeah, I grew up in a working class community. Books weren't, something that we were exposed to very often. We didn't own books. But I think I was fascinated by the world. I was curious about the world, especially my neighborhood growing up near the border in San Diego. And I kind of wished more people were aware of the kind of neighborhood that I was living in, because I think although, there are parts of it that are maybe not what we're looking for, there are also beautiful parts. And so neighborhoods like this are complex and they're worth exploring. So even though I didn't grow up as a reader, I was always kind of intrigued by the stories around me. And so I started writing little spoken word poems about life around me, about being a mixed race person. And then over time, I started to become a reader as well. And I always say you can't become a writer until you're first a reader. So that didn't happen for me until later on. But once I did, I started to understand, oh, I'm not just telling stories about my neighborhood. I'm joining a conversation with other people who have explored similar topics.
Your book, Mexican WhiteBoy, has faced challenges and bans. How do you feel about its reception in this climate of censorship? And what do you hope readers take away from its message?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, when you publish a book, it's no longer yours and it could be used in many different ways. So sometimes those ways are very positive, like people are exploring what the book I think is about, which is racial identity and how to understand your own sense of belonging, especially when you grow up in between two cultures. But sometimes your book is used for in ways that you don't want to have happen, right? So um, I've had picture books and Mexican WhiteBoy banned or challenged in different communities. And that, at first you think, oh, being banned, that's pretty cool, like I'm so out there, you can't even read my books. But then when you see who's being prohibited from reading your books, and it's the very audience you want to reach, then you see kind of the downside of this idea of a book being banned. With Even with picture books, though, it could be caught up in a political discourse that is outside of your reach. Right now people, certain communities don't want books in schools when the book explores racial identity or LGBT, topics. So they just do not want that in the school, even though if they actually read the book, you could see that it's very healthy for young people to, be exposed to these ideas. And I always say there's no safer place to explore tough topics than between the covers of a book. Um, but again, it's just sort of caught in a political discourse. For me, Mexican WhiteBoy is just a simple story about a boy who's half Mexican, half white, growing up near the border, who's just trying to figure out who he is when he doesn't feel Mexican enough, but he also doesn't feel white enough. So he's sort of trying to figure out where he fits.
Do you have an idea on why Mexican WhiteBoy was banned or challenged?
I do. It's a very long story, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. There was a there was a program in Tucson, Arizona called the Mexican American Studies Program, and they had this great idea. Look, our students of color, especially Mexican American students, they're not excelling in school and they're not graduating at a rate that we find, appropriate. So what if we develop this program where they can read authors with names that sound like theirs, who are writing about characters who reflect their lives? So maybe they'll feel more of a sense of ownership of these books. And guess what? It really worked. My book, Mexican WhiteBoy, was part of that curriculum. But then, there was a political power source in that area who decided that the people who had created the Mexican American Studies program were kind of counter to their belief system. So they thought it was basically a political struggle, right? The Mexican American Studies program and the governance of Tucson, Arizona at the time. So they said any book that's taught in this curriculum is now not allowed to be taught in schools. And my book got caught up in that. So um, I will tell you, I had incredible company. I mean, Sandra Cisneros, House on Mango Street was taken away. Even a couple Shakespeare books were pulled from the curriculum. So it wasn't exclusive to my book. It just so happens that I had a book caught up in that curriculum.
Your Newbery Medal-winning picture book, Last Stop on Market Street, is beloved by many. What was the creative process like for that story, and what inspired its themes of gratitude and perspective?
So I started out writing young adult novels exclusively. That was my first, I think, 5 books. And then what I did when I started to write picture books is I kind of went back to where I started as a writer before I was publishing, which was spoken word poetry. So I tried to write this book about gratitude for the YA audience, and I was thinking about that, but it wasn't working. So I was like, what's not working here? So then I thought, what if I tried this as a picture book? And then I really tapped into the voices I used to use when I was young, writing poems. And it just seemed a little bit more straightforward and simple to execute that idea as a picture book. I also got matched up with the incredible illustrator Christian Robinson. And this idea that I had that I was trying as YA, it clicked when I saw one picture on his blog about a boy sitting on the bus with his grandmother. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think this could be a vehicle for the story I wanted to tell as a young adult novel. So I tried it. And I will tell you, when that book came out, it was so quiet. Like I thought, I hope some people read it, but I know it's going to be a very small number of people. It's just too quiet. I even tried multiple endings to make it a bigger ending, but I couldn't figure out how to make it a bigger, more commercial ending. So I just went back to the quiet ending that you see in the book now. And, this is the flip side of Mexican WhiteBoy. It just so happens that a group of people that were on the Newbery committee that year turned and looked at my book. And so, my book got caught up in a very positive way, in kind of a discourse in a positive way. So I feel very lucky. And like I think the best picture books can be quiet little stories, and I'm happy that that can work.
You've spoken about your experiences as a basketball player and a first-generation college student. Have those experiences influenced your writing and the characters you create at all?
100%. So I grew up playing 3 sports. I played soccer, baseball, and basketball. In Mexican WhiteBoy, I did explore baseball, but as a person, the sport that really was kind of my identity, wrapped up in my identity, was basketball. And to be honest with you, um, I was such a basketball nerd that that's all I did. Like I barely, survived in school. I was a very average student, but I was obsessed with the game of basketball. And fortunately for me, I got good enough at basketball that I got a basketball scholarship. And that is where, I became the first person in my family to go to college. And thanks to that, I discovered literature and I became a way better student in college just because that was my dream, is to get to college. and to get to have a free education. So how does it affect my stories? Well, two things stand out. One, I love the rhythms of basketball. There's an inherent rhythm that I think is balletic, like almost it's like dance. Um, Especially pickup basketball. So you kind of like you're coming down the court and you see what's going to happen before it happens if you've played enough. And that was like my world, but also the characters that were surrounding me all the time, like playing pickup basketball in a gym in the middle of the week during the summer, 10 o'clock in the morning. The people who are in the gym don't have regular jobs. Some of the jobs aren't fully legal jobs, but they're trying to figure out how to make a living and survive in this country. And I think what I steal from more than what was happening between the lines during the game is the conversations I heard between games with people who just were regular people. They're joking around, they're having fun, they're capping on each other, but they're also, sharing real stories. And I was just a young person listening to these stories. So I think that's what I use more than actually the game action is the people who populate ports like this and just the humanity that I experienced there.
So the stories you've heard from playing these pickup basketball games, you use them into your own books?
Absolutely, but I wouldn't even say specifically the stories, it's more the worldview. Um, how people in working class communities who feel like they don't have as much of an opportunity in our country, how they see the world. And, much of my worldview is informed by both family, who's similar, they have a similar worldview, but also these guys that I played pickup with. So I was inundated with this sort of we're existing in the margins of America, but we're trying to figure out how to make a life. So that was everything around me growing up. And how could that not be a part of the stories that I tell?
You were awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of the Pacific and have a master's in creative writing. How have your academic experiences, particularly in creative writing, influenced your storytelling or your approach to teaching during school visits?
This is such a good question because I always tell people the best writing teacher in the world is great literature. And I think the best thing that happened to me when I studied creative writing is that I had excellent professors who suggested great books for me to read. And by the time I got into graduate school and was studying creative writing, I was ready to read every single thing that they mentioned. So I took a running log. Anytime a professor mentioned a book, I would write it down and I would read it, that semester or during the summer. So I became an avid reader. And honestly, I have I have complicated thoughts about getting an MFA in creative writing. So studying creative writing in graduate school. Sometimes I think you don't need to do that, but it is a block of time that you can dedicate to writing. And it is also, you're surrounded by people who are like-minded, who want to pursue writing too. But most importantly, I think it's the books that are talked about. And you kind of get this idea of like, what do I want to read next? And you get so excited about it. So even though you don't need a master's in creative writing to be a writer, not at all. If you use it the right way, it can be a great resource for time and exposure to great books.
What has having this master's in creative writing, and how do you think it leveraged you above people who don't take that class?
I think what it is, if you do study it, you're thinking so much about the craft. So I always tell people I entered the creative writing program as a basketball player, and I left the creative writing program as a writer. So I think I learned to become a professional writer in my MFA program. At the end of the day, it's all about discipline. And I think the one thing that I pulled, from my program, aside from great literature is how to be a disciplined writer, how to sit down every day and treat it like a job. I had one friend who used to say, like, I was confused by this. He'd be like, I'd say, "What are you doing today?" And he'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to go do some work." And he was talking about his writing. And I was like, that's so strange. Why would he think of it as work? To me, it's like something different. But then what I realized over time is that it can be both your passion and your work. And if you can marry those two things, then you're kind of in it for the right reasons. You're not just there to try to make money on a story, but you're also not just goofing around. You're merging your passion with your work. And I feel like that's what we should all be trying to do, is find a job that doesn't feel like work.
Matt, thank you so much for sharing your journey and insights with us today. From We Are Here to Love and Milo Imagines the World, your stories continues to capture the complexities of human experiences across all ages. Each book adds a unique layer to the literary landscape, inspiring readers to see the world and themselves through new perspectives. Your dedication to connecting with young readers and championing diverse stories is truly impactful. Can't wait to see where your storytelling takes us next time.
Well, thank you so much and good luck